Helen, a thin, lost old woman, walked with difficulty through the crowded streets of Los Angeles, searching in vain for her son. Every few steps, she held out a trembling hand, unable to be heard. "Have you seen my son?" Her words came out as a faint whisper, but no one paid any attention to her. Some people just glanced at her with fleeting pity. Others avoided her gaze altogether, walking faster to escape the scene. Her eyes were glazed and unfocused, glancing at strangers hurrying by. David, a young paramedic, noticed her as he walked out of a nearby coffee shop. He watched the people pass her, some more indifferent than others. Something about Helen's desperate expression drew him in. When she turned back toward him, he saw the confusion on her face, the way her shoulders slumped, as if every second weighed on her. Without hesitation, David approached her. "Ma'am, are you okay? Can I help you?" Helen's face softened slightly, her eyes brightening with a glimmer of hope. "My son," she whispered, reaching out to him. David held her hand gently, voice calm, as he assured her that he'd help. After a few minutes of talking, David realized Helen was more than just lost. She was disoriented and couldn't recall how long she'd been wandering. There was a haunting emptiness in her eyes, the kind he'd seen before in patients struggling with memory loss. "How about I take you somewhere safe, all right?" he offered gently. Helen nodded, too exhausted to argue or resist. David led her to his car and drove to Sunnyvale Care Home, a modest nursing facility on the quieter side of town. He'd taken other patients there before, but he'd never felt this level of responsibility. He kept glancing at Helen in the passenger seat, noting how small and frail she looked. She seemed to sink into the seat, hands clasped in her lap, eyes staring blankly ahead. When they arrived, David helped her out and guided her to the front desk. Behind it sat Karen, the receptionist and administrator at Sunnyvale. Karen looked up from her paperwork with an expression that was anything but welcoming. She barely acknowledged David's presence before turning her sharp, disapproving gaze toward Helen. Karen sighed, eyeing Helen with thinly veiled annoyance. "We're not a shelter for the homeless, David." David straightened, his voice steady but firm. "She's not homeless, Karen. She's lost and needs help. Just register her, okay?" Karen scoffed, but picked up her clipboard, muttering under her breath about strays and extra work. Helen stood silently beside David, her hands twisting anxiously as she took in the cold, sterile environment. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting a harsh glow over the worn linoleum floor and walls painted in a washed-out beige. Every corner seemed to amplify her sense of isolation. "Name?" Karen asked. "Helen," David answered quickly. He placed a reassuring hand on Helen's shoulder, feeling her shiver slightly under his touch. Karen scribbled the name, barely glancing at Helen, before continuing with the rest of her questions in a rapid, uninterested tone. When the paperwork was done, Karen looked up at David, her tone dripping with impatience. "You done playing hero?" she sneered. Ignoring her, David knelt down to Helen's eye level, speaking softly. "They'll take care of you here. I'm going to help you find your son, okay? You're not alone." Helen's eyes met his, a spark of gratitude breaking through the confusion. As David turned to leave, he caught the gaze of Sarah, a nurse who had just walked in and overheard the conversation. Sarah was the opposite of Karen. Her warm, gentle demeanor instantly put people at ease. She gave David a nod, understanding his silent request for help. Sarah approached Helen, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "I'll be here with you," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "You're safe now." For a moment, Helen looked from David to Sarah, uncertainty still flickering in her eyes, but with a small glimmer of hope. David gave her a final reassuring smile, then stepped away, trusting that Sarah would keep his promise to her. As he exited Sunnyvale, he glanced back, his heart heavy. He knew that finding Helen's son wasn't going to be easy, but he felt a strange resolve forming within him. Helen sat in her corner at Sunnyvale Care Home, her frail hands wrapped around a worn-out photograph of a baby boy. She mumbled his name softly to herself, eyes closed, as if that would bring the memories into sharper focus. Each night, she grasped at fleeting images, tiny fragments of his face, his laughter, the way he had looked up at her with trust before she'd had to let him go. Guilt clawed at her, a constant ache in her chest. She could barely remember why or how she'd lost him, only that it had been painful, and she had tried so hard not to think about it since then. Now, the thoughts surged forward with a vengeance. There was no hiding from them here. David, the nurse who had found Helen wandering the streets before bringing her to the home, had picked up on her quiet agony. She didn't talk much, but her face, drawn and lined, spoke of something lost, something deeply mourned. David brought the matter to Sarah, the only other person at the home who seemed to care beyond just her job title. Together, they started digging. It wasn't easy. The few records they could find were scattered, and most of them seemed incomplete or vague. But after a week of prying into old files and asking quiet questions, they found out a bit more about Helen's story. She had been a victim of abuse in her youth. Her husband, a cruel man who had cut her off from family, friends, and support. At some point, likely under threat or duress, she'd been forced to give her son up, though the exact circumstances were still unclear. Karen, the cold and cynical head of the home's administrative staff, found the entire story amusing. She saw Helen as little more than another washed-up old lady with nothing left but regret. One day, catching Helen in the hall with that same picture clutched to her chest, Karen sneered. "Still carrying that, huh? Moping around for the kid you abandoned? Doesn't look like he's come searching for you, has he?" Her voice was flat, unkind, and sharp enough to cut through Helen's defenses. Helen froze, her knuckles white as she clutched the photograph tighter. The look on her face was one of pure anguish, but she said nothing, lowering her head and turning back to her room. That night, she stayed silent, folding into herself even more, as if somehow that would erase her pain. David noticed the change in Helen immediately. She'd been quiet before, but this was different. She was avoiding everyone, retreating even further into herself. He felt a surge of anger at Karen's words, at the cruelty that seemed almost effortless for her. He spoke with Sarah, his voice low and tight. "We need to help her," he said. "If there's any way to track down her son, we've got to do it. No one deserves to carry this kind of weight alone." David stood over the cluttered desk, brow furrowed. There was something off about these papers, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. Digging into Helen's old records had seemed like a straightforward task, but now, well, there was no doubt things were about to get complicated. Helen had 3 children, not 1, 3. He blinked, momentarily stunned. How could she not remember this? It wasn't as though her mind hadn't been sharp once, and she certainly remembered Michael, the one son she'd been searching for. He flipped through the documents again, scanning names, dates, the faded ink betraying Helen's ties to a life far more entangled than anyone had guessed. The records were dusty with time, but they whispered of choices and losses he couldn't imagine. Just then, Sarah burst in. Her face was flushed, and she clutched a letter that looked even older than the records David held. "You won't believe this," she said, waving it like a flag. "I got this from the archives department." She paused, catching her breath. Turns out, Helen used to live in a town just outside Los Angeles, and according to the file, she once placed a child in an orphanage nearby. David's gaze shifted to the letter in her hand, which seemed to hold decades of secrets in its folds. His thoughts were racing, picturing Helen wandering the halls, lost in thoughts of the past she'd been forced to bury. This letter might be the key to finding her child, or at least one of them. He felt a renewed determination to follow every lead, no matter where it led. It was no longer just a case of comforting an elderly woman. It was about piecing together a life she'd been robbed of. Sarah nodded. "It's all here. They were vague on details, but there's enough here to go on. If we're lucky, we might just find something that leads us to her son." She held the letter tighter, as if afraid it might disappear in her hands. But they weren't alone in their quest. Karen, ever watchful, had caught wind of their investigation. She could see the looks David and Sarah exchanged, the stolen conversations in the hallways, the way they kept close tabs on Helen. She hated it. As far as Karen was concerned, meddling with the past was asking for trouble. And if Helen found her son, who knew what kind of attention might come pouring in? It was dangerous. Worse, it was a threat. Karen moved fast. Gossip traveled quickly in a place like Sunnyvale, and she knew just the right words to spread. It started small, whispers at the lunch table about Helen's delusions of family, remarks to residents about David and Sarah's questionable use of their time. But Karen wasn't one to stop there. She leaned into it, suggesting that Helen's memories were more fantasy than fact, nudging the other staff to question why David and Sarah were digging so deep into a woman who could hardly tell one day from the next. It was clever, really. Karen knew that doubt was like a spark in dry brush. It didn't take much to start a fire. Soon, even the other aides were murmuring, and Helen's search for her son turned into fodder for quiet mockery. Karen had achieved exactly what she'd intended. The staff began to turn skeptical glances on Helen, and David and Sarah felt the weight of suspicion building around them. One evening in the dining hall, Karen decided to turn up the heat. She watched as Helen, sitting alone with her tray, gathered the courage to talk to a nearby resident. Helen's face lit up as she introduced herself, tentative but eager for connection. But before she could get a word out, Karen's voice rang out across the hall, dripping with false cheer. "Well, if it isn't our resident celebrity," Karen announced, loud enough for all to hear. "Helen's on a mission to find her long-lost family, bless her heart. Isn't it sweet how she still believes in fairy tales?" The room went silent. Helen's hopeful smile faltered, and she looked down, fiddling with her napkin, visibly shrinking under Karen's gaze. Karen smirked, glancing around to gauge the reactions. A few residents looked away, uncomfortable, while others cast pitying glances in Helen's direction. No one spoke up. "Come on, Helen," Karen said, feigning sympathy. "Why don't you leave those memories where they belong? We're all better off in the here and now, aren't we?" Her tone was light, but her eyes gleamed with a satisfaction that left no doubt about her intentions. Helen's shoulders slumped. She muttered something under her breath, her voice too quiet to carry across the room. For a moment, she looked like she might try again, but then the moment passed, and she fell silent, her spirit visibly dimmed. David clenched his fists, watching from the other side of the room. He exchanged a tense glance with Sarah. They both knew that Karen's tactics were more than just mean-spirited. This was Karen's way of keeping control, of ensuring that anyone who might stand up for Helen was kept in line. If they let her win now, Helen would never find the closure she needed. After dinner, David pulled Sarah aside. "This has gone on long enough," he said, voice low but firm. "Karen's not just being a bully. She's trying to sabotage us. We need to find that kid, and we need to do it before Karen shuts us down completely." Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "Agreed. Let's pay a visit to that orphanage first thing tomorrow. We'll need records, and if Karen asks, we're just checking out a lead." Michael strode into Sunnyvale Care Home, not expecting anything more than a brief tour of the facility. As a successful businessman from Seattle, he had considered investing in care homes, both as a business and as a way to honor the memory of his foster parents. They'd taught him values, a sense of responsibility for the community, and, in his words, how to do some good. But this visit held another layer of importance. Michael had grown up in foster care, and despite his successes, he'd always wondered about his birth mother. He never had a name, just scraps of stories from the few records he could access. This place was just a potential business deal, but still, he hoped it might spark a memory, a clue, something. Karen, the manager of Sunnyvale, spotted him immediately. She watched him introduce himself to the staff with that natural confidence only the truly wealthy seemed to carry. She'd heard enough during his introduction, foster care, searching for my biological mother, to make her stomach drop. Could it be possible? Could this polished man actually be the lost son of that confused old lady, Helen? If so, Karen's carefully balanced web of deceptions could unravel, especially her side schemes with John, the maintenance guy. They'd been siphoning funds from Sunnyvale for months. It was all under the radar. Small amounts here, bigger chunks there, maintenance expenses on paper, but real cash in their pockets. A reunion between Michael and Helen could ruin everything. When Michael wandered the halls, his gaze softened. He seemed lost in thought. As he made his way past the lounge, his eyes caught sight of an elderly woman hunched over a book, her thin fingers tracing each line. She looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Michael felt something tug deep in his chest, a strange familiarity, but he shook it off. Helen smiled at him, a faint glimmer in her eyes, as if she too sensed something, yet neither said a word about it. Instead, Michael approached, offering a polite smile. "Hello, ma'am." "I'm Michael," he said. Helen nodded, gesturing to the seat next to her. They chatted casually, neither knowing who the other was. Helen told him about her life, or rather, what little she remembered of it. There were holes in her memory, fragments of a son she barely recalled, but she spoke of him as though he were still nearby. Michael listened with quiet attentiveness, every sentence making his pulse quicken, but he kept his expression neutral, professional. He told her of his life, his journey from one foster home to the next, how he had built a business from scratch. Helen listened with interest, sensing that this young man had overcome struggles like hers, but neither dared to say more. Karen watched them from across the room, her mind racing. Meanwhile, Sarah, a nurse who'd grown fond of Helen, noticed the interaction from the hallway. She had her own suspicions. Something about Michael's story echoed Helen's fragmented memories, her stories of a lost son. Sarah knew of Helen's past, knew her story didn't quite add up in a way that made sense, as if she had lost something precious long ago. As Michael rose to leave, he gave Helen a gentle nod, saying he hoped to visit again. Helen watched him go, a wistful look on her face. Sarah approached Helen, asking casually about the conversation. Helen seemed thoughtful. He's a nice young man. Reminds me of someone, but I just can't recall." Sarah's suspicions deepened. Later that evening, Sarah sifted through the records, hoping to find a connection, a lead that might confirm her theory. Karen, however, was one step ahead. She cornered John in the back office, laying out her fears. "If he's her son, we're finished. We'll have to cover our tracks, bury this thing deep." John nodded, his expression tense, knowing well the stakes. Sunnyvale had been their cash cow, and they wouldn't let some long-lost family reunion get in the way. Sarah's hands shook as she held the document, a faded certificate that confirmed what she'd hoped and feared. Michael was Helen's son. She had to tell David right away. She hurried down the quiet hall to his office, where he was sitting with Michael, sorting through more old files. Without any preamble, she blurted out, "Michael, we found her. Helen is your mother." Silence dropped over the room as Michael's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. Then, the reality sank in. David suggested a private reunion in the office, a quiet moment for mother and son. Sarah nodded. She could only imagine the shock and emotion Helen would feel. But as they prepared, neither of them noticed Karen and John, standing in the shadows just outside, listening to every word. Karen's jaw clenched. Helen's family reunion was a direct threat to everything she and John had worked to keep hidden. Helen couldn't be allowed to reunite with her son. The plan formed instantly between them, and they moved quickly. Karen knew which keys she needed to lock down the office, and John handled the power box. Within moments, they'd shut off the lights in the entire East Wing, plunging it into complete darkness. They locked the office door where Sarah, David, and Michael were discussing how to break the news to Helen. Inside, they didn't realize their door had been locked from the outside. When David got up to leave and tell Helen, he found himself yanking at a door that wouldn't budge. "What's going on?" Michael asked, tension creeping into his voice. David shook his head, confused but not yet worried. He figured it was a power glitch, until Sarah noticed the phone lines were dead too. "This isn't an accident," she said, her voice low. "They've locked us in." Meanwhile, Helen, alone in her room, sensed something was off. She tried to rest, but unease gnawed at her. Then she noticed a shift in the air, a change in the usual noises from the hallways. She forced herself to stand, gripping her walker as she ventured out. Her gut told her something was very wrong. It was then she saw Karen, who gave her a cold, mocking smile. "Looking for someone, Helen?" Karen taunted, blocking her path. Helen's heart raced. She didn't know why Karen was here, but the hostility in her voice sent a chill down her spine. She attempted to move past her, but Karen leaned in. "I wouldn't worry about your family reunion, Helen. It's not happening." Panic flashed in Helen's mind. Somehow, she understood Michael was in danger. Her resolve hardened. Weak as she was, she wouldn't let anything stand between her and her son. She turned back down the corridor, intent on finding another way to reach him. Karen, realizing her attempt to intimidate Helen had failed, muttered angrily and went back down the hall to confer with John. Back in the office, Michael, David, and Sarah were trying every way to get out. "They've cut off everything," David muttered, slamming his shoulder into the door to no avail. The darkness added a layer of urgency to their predicament, and Michael's mind spun with questions, but worry for his mother pressed heavily on him. He knew Helen was nearby, but trapped, he couldn't protect her. Helen, meanwhile, had reached the east stairwell and was inching her way down with unsteady but determined steps, hoping to find another way into the office. Her breath was short, but her mind was focused on one goal. Michael. She had barely made it halfway when she heard a sharp noise from the corridor behind her, then the flicker of flames. John had been fumbling with a candle in frustration, grumbling about the uselessness of old fools and family reunions. But in his impatience, he dropped the candle. A spark caught the edge of a rag, then spread to the floor, and within seconds, flames leapt up along the curtains and up the walls. John stared at the flames for a split second, frozen in shock, before the horror of what he'd done sank in. "Karen!" he shouted, his voice tight with panic as the fire spread rapidly, filling the corridor with smoke. Karen rushed over, cursing under her breath, realizing the blaze had taken hold too quickly for them to stop it. She grabbed John's arm and pulled him, intending to flee down the main hallway. But the fire moved faster than they did. In the locked office, the faint smell of smoke reached Michael, David, and Sarah. Sarah's eyes widened. "Something's burning," she whispered, her voice taut with dread. David knew they had only minutes before the smoke and flames reached them. He forced his weight against the door again, harder this time, until his shoulder ached. The three of them exchanged a tense look, each realizing the danger growing outside. Meanwhile, Helen pushed onward, her breaths shallow as she struggled against her fear and the rising smoke. The corridor filled with shouts and the unmistakable crackling of fire, but she didn't turn back. Step by painful step, she advanced, determined to reach her son. Helen's hands trembled as she found the keys hanging in Karen's coat pocket. The keys were cool and solid, a strange reassurance in the chaos surrounding her. Flames crackled from down the hall, casting shadows that flickered like ghostly memories. She tightened her grip on the keys and moved quickly, ignoring the haze of smoke starting to cloud her vision. Her son was somewhere behind that locked door, and she was going to get him out. Reaching the office, Helen inserted the key into the lock, her heart racing. The door opened, and inside, she found Michael, David, and Sarah. They looked up, stunned at first, but the realization settled in almost instantly. Without a word, Michael wrapped his arms around Helen. For a moment, the smoke, the fire, the noise, all of it disappeared as mother and son were reunited. After all these years, the silence between them spoke louder than words. "Come on, we need to move," David urged, jolting them back to reality. They couldn't stay. The flames were closing in, and the smoke grew thicker by the second. Helen held onto Michael's arm as they made their way through the hallway. She coughed, trying to ignore the sting in her lungs, focusing only on Michael's reassuring presence beside her. They turned a corner, the exit in sight, when they heard voices up ahead. Outside, a group of residents had gathered, their faces painted with worry and relief as they saw Helen, Michael, and the others emerge from the smoke. Helen's grip on her son tightened as they stepped into the fresh air. The night was cool, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat inside the building. They caught their breath, but their peace was short-lived. Karen and John were at the far end of the lawn, edging toward the back fence, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But two staff members spotted them. "You think you're just going to walk out of here after everything?" one of the staff shouted. Karen's face twisted, a flash of anger mixed with desperation, as she realized her plan to escape wasn't going to work. John tried to push past, but the staff formed a barrier, blocking their path. It was over. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, filling the air with a sense of justice closing in. Within moments, police cars pulled up, lights flashing, illuminating the scene with harsh clarity. Officers moved in swiftly, taking hold of Karen and John. The two were led to the squad cars, handcuffed, their faces pale under the red and blue lights. The charges, elder abuse, reckless endangerment, embezzlement, all hung in the air, unspoken but understood. As Karen was guided into the back of a police car, she looked over her shoulder at Helen. Their eyes met, and for a split second, something cold and bitter flared in Karen's gaze, a final shred of defiance. But Helen stood firm, her hand gripping Michael's arm, unwavering. Karen's defiance faded, her head turning away as the car door closed, the last remnants of her control slipping away. Michael turned to Helen, his face softened by relief and a glimmer of something deeper, a promise. "Mom, I'm not going to let this happen here ever again." His voice was steady, filled with a determination that cut through the night's lingering tension. The next morning, Michael gathered the remaining staff and some of the residents in the recreation room, a space that felt strangely quiet after the previous night's chaos. He explained his intentions, his vision for Sunnyvale. He was going to rebuild it from the ground up, turning it into a place of comfort and dignity, a true home for those who needed it. "Sunnyvale will be a place where people feel safe," he said, his gaze steady, meeting each pair of eyes in the room. "We're going to fix what's broken, not just in the walls and the floors, but in the way we care for each other." A murmur of agreement passed through the room, the energy shifting as hope took root. David stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. "We're with you, Michael," he said simply, his words carrying a weight that resonated with everyone. Helen, standing beside her son, felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging that had been absent for far too long. Over the following weeks, construction crews came and went, their work transforming Sunnyvale bit by bit. Fresh paint, new furniture, secure locks on every door. It was as if the building itself was being given a second chance. The gardens outside were replanted, a quiet sanctuary, growing where neglect had once taken root. For Helen, each day was a new beginning. She spent mornings in the garden, her hands in the soil, breathing in the sense of fresh earth and flowers. Michael often joined her, their conversations filled with memories, regrets, and laughter, both of them slowly mending the pieces of a fractured past. Sunnyvale Care Home's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Just months earlier, it had been an aging, neglected facility with bare walls, dim lighting, and an oppressive quiet that hung over its halls. Now, under Michael's investment and meticulous care, it was unrecognizable. Clean, airy spaces filled the building. Brightly painted walls and comfortable furniture gave it a sense of homeliness. The residents, many of whom had once shuffled down those halls with downcast eyes, seemed to walk taller, their faces relaxed with smiles. Michael, now familiar to everyone as the driving force behind these changes, was seen around the grounds, greeting residents, asking about their needs. "It's nice to see you, Helen," he'd say, with a gentle pat on his mother's shoulder. Helen looked around the renewed facility, filled with pride and gratitude. Her son had turned this place into more than just a care home. It was a haven. She saw how the other residents felt comforted by his presence, their spirits lifted by his care. Her own heart felt lighter with him nearby. The staff changes were just as notable. Sarah, who had been with Sunnyvale through its toughest days, was officially promoted to head nurse. She accepted the role with her usual quiet dedication, never one to seek out praise, but always willing to work harder. David, who had been a steady and kind presence, was promoted to operations manager, tasked with overseeing the day-to-day management of Sunnyvale. He took to the role naturally, ensuring schedules ran smoothly and everyone's needs were met. Together, Sarah and David became the core of Sunnyvale's staff. They understood the residents deeply and seemed to know what each person needed, even before they asked. They were a pair residents trusted implicitly, creating a sense of safety and familiarity. Everyone knew them, and everyone respected them. For many, they had become the family they missed. Residents gathered in the common area one afternoon, murmuring excitedly. Michael had organized a grand reopening event. Decorations adorned the walls, bright flowers and warm colors filling the space. The scent of freshly baked cookies lingered in the air, and upbeat music played softly. The feeling of joy was contagious, even among those who rarely showed emotion. Helen, dressed in her best blouse, beamed as she saw the community coming together. Residents chatted, some holding hands, others in animated conversations about the new Sunnyvale. As the event began, Michael stood at the front of the room, his presence calm but commanding. He looked over the crowd, his expression serious but soft. "Thank you all for being here today," he began. His voice echoed through the room, every resident quiet, listening intently. Today, Sunnyvale isn't just reopening. Today, it becomes what it was always meant to be, a place where you can feel safe, where you're respected, and where your well-being comes first. Applause filled the room. Residents clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Michael continued, acknowledging the hard work of the staff, especially Sarah and David, who had stood by Sunnyvale through every challenge and made it a home worth coming back to. More applause followed as Sarah and David, visibly touched, exchanged proud glances. Michael then spoke about the future of Sunnyvale, his vision to ensure it would remain a sanctuary for anyone in need, his commitment unwavering. With that, Michael opened the floor to the residents, inviting anyone who wished to share their experiences or say a few words. Helen stood, a little unsteady, but full of resolve. She looked at Michael, pride gleaming in her eyes. "Thank you, son," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm grateful to have you back, and even more grateful for what you've done here. You've given us all a place we can finally call home." The room fell silent, her words sinking in. She glanced around, taking in the faces of her friends and neighbors, the place that had once been filled with uncertainty, now brimming with life. After the fire and all the chaos, Michael and Helen finally had the quiet time they'd longed for. Michael hadn't known what to expect when he first met Helen, but the more they talked, the more he realized how much he'd missed having a mother. Helen, her voice, still weak but full of resolve, spoke in short bursts, as if each memory hurt and healed in equal measure. She told Michael about her regrets, her struggles, and why she'd been forced to give him up. Michael listened, nodding, as if piecing together fragments of his own lost story. Gradually, the pain between them began to soften, leaving room for a kind of peace neither had ever expected to feel again. At Sunnyvale Care Home, life started to settle back into routine, though a new spirit seemed to fill the halls. Margaret, who had always been somewhat reserved, found herself drawn to Henry, the quiet gentleman who'd been her neighbor for years. They shared meals, walked through the gardens, and in the company of Helen's story of reconciliation, their friendship deepened into something more. Staff noticed how Margaret's eyes seemed brighter, how Henry would wait a little longer by her door every morning. Their connection seemed to spark a newfound energy within the other residents who quietly rooted for them in their own gentle way. Sunnyvale was no longer just a place to live out one's days. It was becoming a place of new beginnings, even in the twilight years. As for Sarah and David, the recent ordeal had only strengthened their dedication to Sunnyvale. Sarah, always compassionate and quick to act, felt a renewed commitment to making sure each resident felt seen and respected. David, her steadfast ally, vowed to keep Sunnyvale safe and ensure that nothing like Karen and John's abuse ever happened again. With the shadow of Karen and John's manipulation behind them, the team operated with a shared sense of purpose. Both Sarah and David knew they'd been lucky to expose the corruption before it went any further, and they didn't take that responsibility lightly. Their loyalty to the residents, to the care home, had deepened into something fierce and unbreakable. Helen's story spread through the care home like wildfire, a beacon of hope and resilience. Residents spoke of her as if she were a legend, someone who'd risen from her own ashes, who had found her son despite all odds. Her strength, her refusal to let life's losses break her spirit, inspired them. To those who'd grown used to the weight of their own regrets, Helen was proof that second chances were real, that it wasn't too late for reconciliation. Staff and residents alike found themselves reflecting on their own lives, their own missed opportunities, wondering if, perhaps, like Helen, they could find a way back to the people they'd lost. In the weeks that followed, the changes at Sunnyvale Care Home were undeniable. The residents no longer seemed to just drift through their days. Helen's resilience, Margaret and Henry's quiet romance, and Sarah and David's renewed devotion had sparked something that felt almost like a movement. Helen, without ever intending to, had set a new tone for the home. As the days passed, the transformation of Sunnyvale Care Home under Michael's watchful eye became clear. His dedication to this new chapter was unwavering. Rooms were refurbished, hallways brightened, and outdoor spaces carefully landscaped. Michael had tapped into local connections, calling on the community for support. Donations began trickling in, with townsfolk chipping in everything from fresh coats of paint to funding for medical equipment. This wasn't just a project for him, it was personal. Michael knew he was building more than just a care facility. He was creating a safe, welcoming haven, a place his mother and others like her could truly call home. But the highlight everyone was waiting for was the wedding. Margaret and Henry, two long-time residents who had found companionship in each other's company, were finally tying the knot. As the ceremony began, Helen stood by their side, holding Margaret's bouquet with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of this new, unexpected happiness. Henry looked at Margaret with a sparkle in his eye that seemed to erase the years, and she, in turn, looked back with a quiet contentment. They exchanged vows that spoke of companionship and finding joy even in the twilight of life. For those few moments, the worries of age and health melted away. The room, filled with smiles and quiet tears, became a reminder that love, in all its forms, endures. When the vows were finished, the applause was gentle but heartfelt. Helen hugged Margaret and Henry, whispering her best wishes. There was warmth and a sense of belonging that radiated through the home. Helen's heart was full, not only from witnessing the ceremony, but from realizing how far she herself had come. Despite finding her son and reuniting with her family, Helen had made a choice. She would stay at Sunnyvale. For her, this place wasn't just a shelter. It had become her community, her family. Here, she was needed. And so, she became a constant presence, a comforting figure for other residents. Her resilience, her journey, had made her a symbol of hope for those around her. Michael, seeing his mother's dedication, knew he'd made the right decision. Standing with her after the ceremony, he committed himself to ensuring Sunnyvale would be more than just a facility. It would be a second home, a sanctuary. He approached community leaders to secure ongoing funding and developed a network of volunteers to engage with the residents regularly. Michael promised the residents, "This is your home. No one here will ever feel alone." The support system he established was robust, aimed at offering more than just medical care. He wanted Sunnyvale to be a place where people could live with dignity and companionship.